A king so ruthless, he tore England from the grip of the Pope himself, a tyrant who married 6 women and murdered 2. But when death finally came for King Henry VIII, it didn't arrive with crown or sword. It came with a stench of rotting flesh, the scream of gangrene, and a coffin that couldn't contain the oozing horror inside. This isn't a fairy tale. This is the truth they never taught you in school. By the end, his own servants vomited from his stink. His leg ulcers bubbled with pus. And when his corpse began to melt, the stray dogs of London feasted, like it was their last supper. In 1491, a boy was born into royal luxury. His name? Henry Tudor. From the moment he could walk, he was trained to rule. Handsome, athletic, intelligent. He was everything a prince should be. Poets wrote about his golden hair. Ambassadors compared him to Apollo. At just 17, he inherited the throne of England, and for years he ruled like a dream come true. He danced at balls, jousted in tournaments, and led his country with confidence and charm. Europe watched in awe as this young king reshaped the world around him. But fate had other plans. Because a man who once stood tall in shining armor would one day die swollen, stinking and screaming in pain, alone in a room filled with fear and decay. And the fall began not with betrayal, but with a single horse. January 24th, 1536. A jousting tournament at Greenwich Palace. Knights clash in the arena. The crowd cheers. And among them rides King Henry himself, still proud, still strong. Then disaster. His horse stumbles. Henry is thrown. He lies unconscious beneath the weight of his mount for 2 long hours. When he awakens, he's alive, but something inside him has changed. The wound on his leg refuses to heal. It becomes a festering sore, oozing pus, spreading infection like a curse. Over time, it grows worse. The flesh blackens. The bone shows through. The stench fills entire rooms before he even enters. Worse than the physical damage? What happened to his mind? Before the fall, Henry was known for his razor-sharp intellect, his charm, and his political cunning. He was a king who could outwit diplomats and inspire armies with a single speech. But after the jousting accident, something inside him snapped, not just physically, but mentally. His once brilliant mind began to twist. He started seeing betrayal behind every smile, rebellion in every glance. No one was safe, not even those closest to him. Within weeks of the fall, he ordered the arrest of his second wife, Anne Boleyn, on charges so absurd they made little sense: adultery, incest, even witchcraft. And yet, no one dared question him. Some historians believe the head injury triggered brain damage that turned him into a monster. Others think it merely gave him an excuse to unleash the rage he'd been hiding all along. Either way, the Golden Prince was gone. What remained was a tyrant, drowning in paranoia, surrounded by fear, and slowly rotting from the inside out. There was a time when Henry VIII stood tall in shining armor, a symbol of royal power and masculine strength. But by the end of his life, that image had been replaced with something out of a nightmare. He had become unrecognizable. His body swelled beyond human proportions. His legs were rotting, oozing open wounds that never healed. He couldn't walk, couldn't sit comfortably, couldn't even turn in bed without help. Servants had to lift him like a sack of meat, moving him from room to room in a specially built chair, more throne than mobility aid. But worse than his size or immobility, the smell. It wasn't just bad, it was unbearable. A mix of sweat, pus, decay, and death clung to him like a second skin. Courtiers would cover their noses with perfumed cloths just to survive a few minutes in his presence. Some fainted, others fled. Animals avoided him. Imagine being so rotten that even dogs steer clear. And yet, as we'll see later, they eventually couldn't resist what leaked from his coffin. This wasn't just illness. This was rot. A man dying slowly, piece by piece, while still breathing. And no one could escape it. Not even his closest advisors. Not even his wives. They had to be near him, had to serve him, had to pretend everything was normal under penalty of death. because in Henry's court, even a look of disgust could cost you your head. So they smiled through tears, bowed through nausea, and watched in silence as their king transformed from a golden prince into a bloated, stinking monster. And still he ruled, not with wisdom or grace, but with fear. It wasn't just disease or injury that destroyed Henry VIII. It was also what he ate. His meals were a daily indulgence in excess. Records from his kitchen reveal that he consumed upwards of 5,000 calories a day, mostly from rich meats, heavy pies, and endless goblets of wine and beer. His table groaned under the weight of roasted venison, spiced eel, sugared puddings, and thick, fatty stews. Vegetables? Rarely touched. Fresh fruit? Only if soaked in honey or served with cream. Water? Considered dangerous, often replaced with alcohol. This gluttony, combined with his growing immobility, turned his body into a ticking time bomb. Gout ravaged his joints. His veins clogged with fat. His heart labored under the strain. And worst of all, his leg ulcers worsened with every passing year, oozing, rotting, spreading infection like poison through his bloodstream. Doctors tried to help, but their methods were medieval horrors. Bloodletting drained what little strength he had. Mercury treatments burned his skin. Hot iron seared open wounds shut, only for them to reopen days later, worse than before. And still, Henry refused to change. He continued to eat like a king, even as his body betrayed him. Even as servants gagged at the stench of decay that followed him. Even as courtiers whispered behind closed doors about the monster he had become. Because of Henry, food wasn't just sustenance. It was control, power, comfort, a final act of defiance against pain, age, and death itself. But no amount of feasting could stop what was coming. As Henry's body betrayed him, so too did his heart, or whatever remained of it. Even in his bloated, decaying state, he continued to marry, not for love, but for control, and perhaps one last desperate attempt at youth. His fifth wife was Catherine Howard, just 19 years old, barely more than a girl. He called the marriage a return to vitality, a spark in the darkness. But the truth was far grimmer. She had married a monster, a man who reeked of death, who screamed in pain through the night, who could barely move without help. She tried to survive by playing her role, but even that wasn't enough. Trapped in a nightmare, she sought comfort elsewhere, in the arms of a younger courtier. When the affair was discovered, Henry's rage knew no bounds. He ordered both lovers executed. Alone again, broken and bitter, he married one last time, to Catherine Parr. This time, there was no illusion of romance. She was his nurse, his caretaker, his shield against despair. She stayed not out of love, but duty, and still, she feared for her life every day. Because with Henry VIII, no one was ever truly safe. By the time Henry reached his final year, he was no longer a king, just a man trapped inside a body that had turned against him. He could barely move. Every breath was a struggle. His legs were rotting, oozing fluids that stained the sheets beneath him. Pain consumed him, constant, unrelenting. Some nights, he screamed so loudly that servants outside his chambers wept in fear. His once brilliant mind now wandered between rage and despair. He saw traitors everywhere. Accused friends vanished overnight. Advisors feared even stepping into his sight. He suspected poison in his food, forcing servants to taste every dish before he touched it. And still, no one dared speak the truth, because in Tudor England, predicting the death of the king was treason. Doctors tried to help, but their treatments only made things worse. Bloodletting drained what little strength he had left. Mercury burned his skin. Hot iron seared open wounds shut, only for them to reopen again, worse than before. As winter set in during early 1547, Henry's body gave up the fight. He lay motionless for hours, eyes hollow, breath shallow. Witnesses say he whispered names in delirium. Some believed they were the names of his dead wives. The end was near, but no one could say it out loud. Not yet. When Henry VIII finally drew his last breath, no one expected the horror that followed. His body was too large for a normal coffin. A special one had to be built, wide enough to contain his bloated form, strong enough to hold his weight. But even that couldn't stop what came next. The embalmers tried their best, but decomposition was faster than preservation. His body had been rotting for years. Now, death only made it worse. Fluids began to leak from the casket unnoticed, pooling silently on the chapel floor. And then the dogs came. Stray animals, drawn by the stench of decay, crept into the royal chapel under the cover of darkness. They found the puddles of fluid, blood, pus, and liquefied flesh, and licked them up without hesitation. This wasn't myth. It was recorded history. Imagine the most feared king in Europe, the man who defied popes, rewrote laws, and sent wives to the scaffold, reduced to this, a corpse so repulsive that even courtiers gagged at his presence, and stray dogs feasted on what leaked from his coffin. The funeral was delayed for weeks. When it finally happened, the smell was still unbearable. Pallbearers struggled. Mourners held their breath. No one wanted to get too close, because even in death, Henry VIII stank of power, pain, and punishment. Henry VIII began life as a golden prince, handsome, intelligent, full of promise. He ended it swollen, stinking and screaming in pain, feared, not loved. His body rotted while he still breathed, his mind twisted with paranoia. And even after death, his corpse betrayed him, leaking through the coffin, licked by stray dogs in the dead of night. But what truly makes his story haunting is not just the horror of his end. It's the irony. He was a man obsessed with legacy, with securing a male heir, with building a kingdom that will remember him forever. And history did remember him, just not the way he wanted. He broke churches, executed wives, and rewrote laws for power, only to leave the throne to one of the greatest queens England ever had, Elizabeth I, daughter of the woman he executed. His son, Edward VI, died young. Mary tried to undo his religious reforms, and failed. But Elizabeth, she ruled like a queen who learned from her father's mistakes. So what remains of Henry? Not just the ruins of monasteries or the Anglican Church, but a warning. Power can build empires, but it cannot stop decay. Henry VIII began life as a symbol of royal perfection, handsome, intelligent, full of promise. But by the end, he had become something monstrous, not just in body, but in spirit. His story isn't just one of medical horror. It's a warning. Absolute power doesn't just corrupt, it isolates. It blinds. It turns men into monsters. He believed himself above nature, above consequence, above even death itself. But in the end, none of it saved him. His wealth couldn't stop the rot. His titles couldn't silence the screams of pain. His fear-inducing rule couldn't keep people from whispering behind closed doors. The fall of Henry VIII teaches us that no amount of glory, no crown, no throne can protect us from time, disease, or our own worst instincts. He was once admired across Europe. In his final years, he was feared, not respected, not loved, just feared. And when he died, even his corpse betrayed him. This is the true tragedy of Henry VIII. Not that he rotted in life, but that no one mourned when he finally fell silent. Let's now take a final look at what remains of this fallen king and how history remembers him. Think of the portraits we see of Henry VIII. Proud, strong, regal. Look at those paintings again. Compare them to the man who died alone in pain, surrounded by fear and stench. The difference is haunting. One is myth, the other is reality. And that's the lesson here. Power may shape kingdoms, but it cannot stop death. We all fade. We all suffer. We all return to dust. Even kings, even empires, especially men who think themselves gods. So the next time you see a ruler claiming invincibility, remember Henry VIII. Remember the king who smelled of death. And remember, even the mightiest fall. Thank you for watching. If you like the story of decay, madness, and royal despair, hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because history doesn't get any darker than this. Until next time, Stay curious, stay morbid, and stay away from kings with open sores.